Thank you. All right. I'm still waking up, so forgive me. I'm a night person. If you saw me last night, I was on because I was awake. I got to fake it. All right. So, we turn the sound down just a little bit. So I don't hear myself coming back at myself so strongly. So it's great to be here with you this morning. I am an economist by training, but I'm an economist by training because when I was a little kid, I decided that I wanted to help make things better for the kinds of folks that lived around us in my neighborhood. My father was a bus driver, my mother was a stay-at-home mother, and I could just see some of the other families just didn't seem as happy as ours did, and they didn't seem to have everything that our family had. And so I asked somebody, what do you do as a grown-up to make things better for people? What do you do as a job for a grown-up? And whoever I spoke to that day said city planning. And so I grew up, I don't know why it says city planning. I must have said something about the condition of the houses or something. But I grew up planning to be a city planner, found my way to Cornell University, accidentally applied to the engineering school because when I was in Cleveland, in Case Western Reserve University, city planning department is in the engineering school. And I wasn't sophisticated enough to know you needed to read the catalog. And so I got to Cornell. City planning was in the architecture school, and I was in the engineering school. Meanwhile, while I was trying to figure out what to do about that, I discovered economics. Accidentally went to an economics talk, and I said, that sounds like what I'm interested in. And so I took economics, but I still didn't figure out how to save the neighborhood as an undergrad, so I figured the answers must be in graduate school. So MIT was the #1 PhD program in the world at the time, got myself admitted there, and discovered that graduate training in economics is basically applied mathematics. It's got nothing to do with the neighborhood. So you tolerate that, you finish the degree, and then I got myself hired at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And at the Kennedy School, it's all about public problem solving. So there we can get away with being interdisciplinary, we can get away with identifying a problem and just finding the tools to work on it. So I started teaching state and local economic development. I taught state and local economic development for 20 years. And a lot of what I taught is stuff that I kind of figured out and made up and put out a book in 1999 that was the book I wished I'd been able to read as an undergraduate. But halfway through that period, I figured out that a major part of the economic development problem is education. It turned out there's a test score series called the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. In 1979, they tested 12,000 young people randomly selected across the country when they were ages 14 to 21. Then they tracked these people every year. So 10 years later, in 1989, they were ages 24 to 31, and we could look to see how strongly their reading and math scores measured 10 years earlier predicted their economic outcomes. And it turned out that the test scores were very strong predictors of their wage rates. And in fact, I was interested, as a person of color, I was interested in racial inequality, and it turns out that those standardized test scores from the late 1970s predicted a lot of the hourly earnings inequality between racial groups. And so then, around 1990 or so is when I started to get really interested in education, because we could deal with a lot of the inequality by race and ethnicity, but also by parents' income level. We could deal with a lot of that inequality by giving children from all backgrounds access to opportunities to thrive educationally, to develop those kinds of skills that pay off in the workforce. And gradually, by 2000, I'd stopped teaching state and local economic development, and I was doing youth development and education and all that kind of stuff. Flash forward to about 2008 or 9, there's a national data series on infants, it's called the Early Childhood Longitudinal Survey. And they can measure responses and cognitive skills of 9-month-olds and 2-month-olds and so on. And found in that data set that a lot of the inequality we're interested in is there by the age of 2. And the nice thing, though, is that a lot of what helps to predict that inequality is early childhood lived experiences that we know something about. There are ways that people interact with their infants and toddlers, things that they do with their little kids that help to predict those skills. And so we're not helpless to do something about this. So that's part of what I want to talk to you about today. Things that we can do as individuals, as families, as whole communities to make sure that our children are prepared from the very beginning to become fully realized human beings. And here, let's see it. Yeah, so we're set up here. Now, the title I have up here, Amarillo's Youngest Children, a High Return Investment in the Future. A high return investment in the future. And I put that title up because I knew I was talking to business people this morning. You like returns, right? But I also want to emphasize that when you think about your own kids and the way you invest in your own children, there is a sense in which the time and effort you spend with your own children does generate a high return in the future, but it's not just an economics return. Okay? It's a return in terms of experiencing life fully, learning to enjoy the arts, to be able to build relationships with other people, to be curious about the world, to be able to travel, to experience life beyond simply financial. And so what I want to ask you is, as you listen this morning, we're not just thinking about let's prepare a workforce so we can make more money, which is all good, but let's think of these children as our children. And we want to prepare them so that they can have good lives in our community. Right? I was trying to decide whether the acronyms, we got other people's children, sort of OPC, and our own children, OOC. And we want to think of all the children as our own children, not just those other people's children. Because when we're thinking just of other people's children, often our impulse is to make sure we hoard the advantage for our own children and make sure those other people's children don't take stuff away from our kids. Okay? And the way we need to be thinking about it is we need to lift the entire community, kids from all backgrounds. How many of you in here are parents? Show of hands. Almost everybody. My grandparents? Okay. And so we have our own children. And so when you think about, actually, one way to think about some of this is there's a guy named Urie Bronfenbrenner that talks about social ecology. And the idea is just like all the living things in the forest are part of an ecology and are interdependent with one another, in social ecologies, human beings are interdependent with one another, right? And so we want to develop the ecology of our community, build on these interdependencies as we go along, and think of ourselves that way. The intervention, the basics I talk about socio-ecological saturation. So saturating the social ecology. And I'm talking about saturating the parents' social ecology so that they, just everywhere they turn, they see this information and get these supports that they need. But also think of yourself and your own family as integrated into that social ecology. And even if you're a business person, one of your hats is parent hats. Okay, so what are the implications of what I'm going to say this morning for your own children? Many of you are members of a church congregation. What are the implications for the way you play your role as a member of that church family? Okay, you live in a neighborhood around other people. You also many of you have businesses and you have employees and there are relationships in your firm. These people go home to children. So how can we be family-friendly workplaces? Okay, so all these different hats we wear, one way or another, put us in contact with children and with parents and give us the opportunity to strengthen and enrich other people's lives. So this phrase here, none of us can do alone what all of us can do together. And again, most of what I'm talking about is most directly related to what I call the basics. And the basics are 5 clusters of parenting practices. We can think of them as 5 principles that are really capture most of what science says is important for early childhood development. And I'll come back and I'll go through those and hook those up. The other piece that I won't talk as much about is the formula, which is the subject of our book. And the basics, it's interesting, the basics was inspired by seeing gaps that open up by the age of 2, so looking at early childhood. The formula was inspired by looking at highly successful young adults. I've been teaching at Harvard for 35 years. I've seen a lot of really impressive people. And you often wonder, how did they get to be that way? And what role might parenting have played in helping them to get that way? My co-author is a journalist who's interviewed a lot of fascinating people. And she too had wondered, how did these people get to be that way? So we teamed up and we interviewed a ton of people, not just the highly successful young adults, but also their parents. And sometimes their mentors and their teachers even. And we distilled from this a pattern. And it turned out the pattern was independent of race or ethnicity or education level. It was some themes in these people's life stories that seemed like they would be pretty important to how they turned out to be so successful. And just to tell you right quickly what those were. The first was called the early learning partner. These parents spent a lot of time with their children between the ages of birth and 5, playing in ways that the child experienced as fun, but they were really building a love of learning and problem solving. So it wasn't just play, the parent was engaged. They might be building things with blocks, and the parent might challenge the child to build it in a slightly more complicated way. Or they might be making up stories, and they try to talk about the motivations of the people in the stories that they're making up. Or just other ways of playing that the child finds really engaging, so when they show up at school, they're ready for school. And they're accustomed to learning with adults. Then there's what we call the flight engineer. And the flight engineer pays attention to what's happening at school and makes sure that the school is serving the child well and will intervene if anything starts to go wrong at school that might knock the child off track. Then there's a fixer who makes sure that the resources are always there to keep the doors to opportunity open. And even if a parent is poor and doesn't have a lot of money, they will walk through a wall to find a way to get their kid into a particular opportunity by asking for help or by selling something that's important to the family. One woman hocked her wedding ring in order to get her child what she needed. And then there's the revealer. The revealer exposes the child to the world, lets the child know that the world's a lot bigger than our neighborhood. There are all kinds of places to go, people to see, things to be interested in, things you could grow up to be. And then there's a philosopher who takes the child very seriously from the very beginning and answers their questions thoughtfully and helps the child find a purpose in life, to find meaning, to develop an ethical compass. Then there's the model who conducts themselves in a way that the child wants to be like that. I want to be like my mom, or I want to be like my dad. And then there's the negotiator who teaches the child to self-advocate, to speak truth to power respectfully, to get what they need in situations when they're interacting with people who are more powerful than they are, and where they almost practice this. One child said, I don't ask my parent for anything unless I'm ready to explain why I should have it, because otherwise it's a waste of time, right? And then finally there's the GPS navigational voice, which is the parent in the child's head. The child can be 25 and dad's in there coaching, bringing along all those lessons from those earlier times, okay? So parents are important, and often what happens is parents know they can't do it all by themselves, and so they recruit other people from their community to help with these things. And especially the parents who don't have a lot of money themselves, or who don't have all the connections that they need themselves, they reach out and they find other people to help them. One of the families in our book, that they were homeless, but the way that they got the child through some of what they needed in high school was through their minister. The child applied to Harvard. He's a Harvard graduate now. He's a school principal at the age of 30 in Chicago these days. But they had so little money on the application for financial aid that Harvard's financial aid office did not believe them and said, we need more information before we can grant you any money. And so the minister helped to write that extra letter. There are also people who would come to the homeless shelter and meet with families and talk with them and sometimes take them places. There's another woman who lived in subsidized housing in Nashville who wanted her son to be middle class. And she knew the middle class and important people, they dress nice and they use big words. And so she, from the very beginning, they used to play Scrabble. He's 4 years old. He has a little Scrabble book. He wanted to beat his mother in Scrabble. So a lot of word play. But when he was about 8 years old, she knew that she couldn't take him all the way. She needed some extra help. So there was a woman who's almost like a talent searcher in the neighborhood, would take kids in a little group. I think it was called the CEO's Club or something like that. They were little kids. And she would take the kids that she selected and give them all kinds of enrichment. She would take them on trips and so on. So this mother I'm talking about, when she first asked the woman to let her son be in the club, the woman said, I'm full, I got a waiting list, I can't. But this mother would not give up. She would not take no for an answer. And so finally the woman came, visited the house. She was impressed with the child because the mother had groomed the child to be the kind of kid other people say, I really want to help that child. She took the child, she started taking him around. She introduced him to a guy who was running for governor. He liked the kid, he's 11 by now. And he started taking him around on trips when they were going around to campaign. By the time the child was 16, he was helping to run campaigns in town. It was then that she saw him also captivate an audience of the 500 people and saw that she had produced what she'd always wanted to produce. She said, I stood back, I couldn't believe it. That was my son, an audience that he had, just captivated. At the age of 26, he was Jeb Bush's coalitions director for the presidential campaign. Okay, now Jeb Bush's campaign didn't go very far, but it wasn't his fault, right? So, at the age of 26, to be the coalition's senior director of a part of a presidential campaign, having grown up in subsidized housing in Nashville, that's a pretty big deal. And he was able to do that because his mother did everything she could do, but she also found supports in the community. Okay, and I'm suggesting to a lot of you that you are in a position to be that support for somebody else's child in the community. Okay, and there are a number of ways that you can play in here. So I mentioned earlier some of the facts that motivate me to start, particularly with the early childhood piece, is that the skill gaps open up really early between people by race and ethnicity and family education, and we actually know what to do about it. The science tells us what those early childhood lived experiences are. And so if we know this, there's sort of a moral imperative to do something about it, not just to sit back and keep the answer to ourselves, right? So what's it worth to take the answer? If we want to actually do this, tell me about the money anyway. And so let's imagine that we wanted to increase lifetime income by $1,500 a year from ages 22 to 65. And we were going to do it just by putting some money in the bank today. The question is, how much money would we need to put in the bank today in order to generate a payout of $1,500 per year when people got, and this today when the child is born. Say the child is born today, put the money in the bank today, when they're 22, it starts to pay out, and it pays out $1,500 a year for that period. Well, in order to do that, we need about $20,000 in the bank today. And actually about $20,000 and some change, I just rounded it off. Okay, the date at birth. If we're going to do it for 5,000 children, it's 100,000. It's $100 million, right? And we really do want to go to scale with this. The approach I'm talking about today is one that's not about a boutique program that does something for a few kids. We're talking about doing something where we can reach into communities and raise everybody, that we can reach everybody, right? And so if we were just going to do it by putting money in the bank, it's a ton of money we've got to put in the bank, $100 million here for 5,000 kids to come up by $1,500 a year. The point is that we can spend a lot less money than that today and probably reap even bigger rewards than that. So if we're thinking about it in terms of financial returns, it's a good investment. Okay, the exact approach we're taking, we haven't totally proven yet, but everything we're suggesting, the science is really deep, that the things we're talking about doing matter. In order to show we can actually get these huge payoffs, we actually have to do the work. We actually have to reach out and engage parents so that they know what to do and they are inspired to actually do it. And we know we've not had enough success so far that we know that can happen. It's not an impossible lift. This is a little poem here because a lot of what we're trying to do is to harvest latent potential, latent unharvested potential. Robert Schuller used to have a saying, any fool can count the seeds in an apple, but only God can count the apples in a seed. The apples in a seed are latent, unharvested potential. How many we get from the seed depends on how effectively we cultivate. This is a poem that I use with teachers in schools, talking about the kids in their classroom. There's a child here in your caring who may someday cure all cancer, but you've got to lay the groundwork so they can come to pass. She's the child who hasn't blossomed, so you cannot see her brilliance. But as sure as there's sunlight, she's here, now, in your class. I can't tell you what her name is, nor her height, nor weight, nor color, only that she is potentially a history-making lass. Okay? We know a lot of famous, really effective people who changed the world who came from very humble backgrounds. And one way or another, they got to where we found them, including some of the ones in our book and some of the ones that you see in life around the world. In this economy, it matters even more than it used to. Modern economy needs folks who are curious. One of our basics, the fourth of our basics, is really about how parents cultivate curiosity. The people who function well and are collaborative problem solvers, who work well with others, who don't give up easily, who persist. And for the past 30 years, the people with these qualities, particularly people who have not just strong math and reading skills, but also strong social skills, have been gaining the advantage in the economy. A colleague of mine, David Deming, has done some work that is distinguishing what's been happening with folks who have various combinations of social skills and basic academic skills. And here's just one little slice of some of what he's found. If you look at employment growth as a share of the U.S. workforce in jobs that require high math skills and high social skills. You've got to work with other people, and in the group you need high math skills, about 7.2% growth in the share of the U.S. labor force of jobs that have those qualities. Jobs that require high math skills and low social skills have actually declined. Just having great math skills is not enough. And he shows in some of his work that even some high-skilled engineering jobs through AI, artificial intelligence, can be automated. Okay. Jobs that require social skills, require working together, are harder to automate. But it's the case that even high-level skills sometimes, particularly math skills, finding ways that machines can do some of those jobs. Here, the wage growth, those same two cuts, high math, high social versus high math, low social, 26% wage growth in the high social, high math category, only 5.7% wage growth in the other category. So when we talk about developing human beings, earlier I talked about the reading and math skills predicting wage growth. And often we think of the social stuff, well, that's just the rest of the life. That's just kind of touchy-feely. Have a nice time, have good friends. No, those social skills actually pay off too now. So it's not just the math and the reading skills, which means when we cultivate our children, we've got to pay attention to all this, and the payoffs are in our private, informal lives and in our work lives. So it's all more important. And the fact is the seeds are planted really early, beginning prenatal. You need people to do the prenatal training and take care of themselves and then move on through. This video is a 1.5-minute video on early brain development, and it's about serve and return, the importance of the interaction between the child and the environment. And it's among the things that we want to make sure that parents understand so that they will put in the effort, which they will find it's kind of effort, but it's also fun. Put in the effort to develop the qualities that this video covers.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
There's actually a recent study done by some folks at MIT and Harvard where they were interested in trying to learn how the number of words 4 to 6-year-olds heard affected their brain structure. Because now they can do the MRI brain scans and actually look at physical changes in brain structures. So they have these little devices kids can wear that pick up the number of words that they heard. And it turned out that they did find changes in brain structure through the interaction, but it was not because of the number of words they heard. It was because of the number of turn-taking interactions. The number of times the child's voice and the parent's voice appeared within 5 seconds of one another in the recordings, which means that there were both voices were there. And if you think about it, a child has to take in the message, process it mentally, form their own response to it, and deliver it back. And the more rounds there were, the more changes they saw in brain structure during this period from ages 4 to 6. Now this here was about early infants, but that same process looks like it's relevant probably throughout our lives, right? I mean, the brain is much more like a muscle than like a rock. That when you exercise it, anything you use it gets stronger. And particularly in early childhood, there is a little bit of a use it or lose it phenomenon. There's a period in early childhood that's called developmental plasticity, when the brain is in formation, and as it forms, there's a flexibility to it that responds to what the child is experiencing. And the more interaction they experience, the stronger those connections become, the more connections form. I mean, when we're born, the brain has the capacity for a huge number of connections to be formed. And how many actually get formed depends upon how much stimulation the child experiences. And it turns out there's a point at which, if there's not a whole lot of actually for everybody, there's what's called pruning. And pruning is like when you've got a bush that has some like dead branches on it, and you kind of cut them away. Well, there's the same thing with the brain. Little unused sections wither and are taken out of the way that might help the rest of it to grow better. Well, just like you fertilize a bush and you give it all the sunlight it needs and it grows lots of dense branches with lots of leaves, there's not as much pruning to do. But if it's not growing as much, you'll have some things that don't fully prosper, and so you prune those, you cut those out of the way. The same kind of thing happens in the brain. Also, that period of developmental plasticity, it peaks and then goes down and shifts over to what's called adult plasticity. So by the time kids are in middle elementary school, they've often shifted to adult plasticity. So their brain still changes. Your brain changes when you learn until you die. But how easy it is differs depending upon whether you're in developmental plasticity or adult plasticity. Well, it turns out the length of the period of developmental plasticity also depends on how much stimulation the child is having. So the more stimulated the child is, the more active their brain is, the longer that developmental plasticity window stays open. So not only is there less pruning during this period, there's a longer period of really rapid, rich development before it flips over to adult plasticity. Okay. When we don't know this, when we don't really know that it matters beginning from birth, we may not be as intentional about the things we do with our children. That word intentional comes up a lot these days with me. when you're around when people are starting to do things they didn't do before. They kind of did them before. They weren't really thinking that much about it, but they're intentional now. Also, when we did the book, The Formula, one of the things we learned from these parents, who were the master parents, we call them, is that they were very intentional. Most of them have what we call the burn. And the burn is this irrepressible drive to be great parents, to figure it out. And it was usually based on something in their own childhood that hadn't gone quite right, that they want to make sure their child didn't experience that kind of hardship. Or it might be a family legacy. The family had always been tinkerers and inventors, and you want to be sure you pass this on to your child so they can have that same set of qualities that you're proud of, that you have, that your ancestors had, so you have a burn to pass that on. But one way or another, people do it on purpose, and they do it intentionally, strategically. And if we know these things about brain development and the importance of interaction, we can be intentional and do that on purpose too. The brain is 80% of its adult size by the time kids are 3 years old. That doesn't mean it's 80% of its adult complexity, but just knowing it's 80% of the size. And you can do that by the weight of it, the circumference of it. It's 90% of adult size by the time kids are 5 years old. So there's just a ton that happens early. Sometimes in the national discussion, there's a lot of discussion these days of preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds, and often just 4-year-olds. And families might think, well, at home we'll just kind of hang out and play, and, bide time until it's time to go to school. If we just bide time until it's time to go to school, we've missed some huge opportunities. We need to start from the very beginning. These are images, and I don't know how well you can see them in the far back, but each of these is an image of a cross-section of brain tissue. And you'll see you have a newborn, 1-month-old, 9-month-old, 2-year-old, and adult. And if you look at the density of the 2-year-olds, it looks more like an adult than like the younger children. Just one more piece of evidence about how much early brain development there is. This is an image of a mother holding a small child. And it's an experiment to test language processing skills, and it's really language processing speed that they're picking up. And she's got on dark glasses and earphones, so she can't see or hear anything, but she's holding the child just to keep the child calm. And on the screen, they flash different objects. This screen has on it a book and a dog. Well, if it starts with a blank screen, they put up one of those objects, and, actually both objects are there, but they name one of the objects and look to see how long it takes the child to look at the object they've named. The child has to hear it, make sense of it, then associate it, then look at it. All right? Well, this particular study looked at children who were from very advantaged backgrounds, parents had college degrees, a lot of education, versus less advantaged backgrounds, where the parents probably didn't have any more than high school education. And what they found was a 6-month gap in language processing speed at the age of 2. Okay. So these gaps open early. And the language processing speed gap is going to be affected by how much language the child hears. And not just hears, how much language is directed at the child. The child needs to feel like the language is directed to them. Having the TV or radio on does no good. The child needs to perceive that the language is directed at them so that they tune into it. Okay, but a 6-month gap at the age of 2. So by the time these kids get to kindergarten, the gap is already very well established. This chart has race and gender on it. You see we've got males and females. We have white, black, Hispanic, Native American on each side. And white girls are the comparison group. So the white females, you see, had no bar there below white females. But the length of the bars for the other groups are how far the other groups are behind at age 1. The little green bars are age 1, and age 2, the little orange bars are age 2. This is the chart that got me interested in early childhood. Native American boys here are 20 percentage points behind white girls at the age of 2. And these are tests that basically get the kids to react and respond to various stimuli that they provide. The gender gaps are also there. If you look at each group, the boys are behind the girls by age 1. The differences aren't big. Some people say, oh, those gender gaps, that's just the difference in male versus female biology. Maybe, but maybe not. Okay? We don't parent kids the same by gender. And the ways that we parent little girls tend to develop more cognitive skills than the way we parent boys. There's studies that show that parents, particularly fathers, interacting with little kids, if they're interacting with a girl, it's language and literacy. If they're interacting with a little boy, it's rough and tumble play. We also are not as sensitive with our boys. We want our girls, we like hugging and kissing on the little girls, but people feel if you do that too much with a boy, you'll turn him into a sissy. So people are denying affection to toddler boys for fear of undermining their masculinity. I had never thought about that. I was talking to some home visitors, and they said it wasn't unusual to be in a household and a little boy will crawl up in somebody's lap and start being affectionate. And somebody else in the room say, don't let him do that, he's going to be gay. I had a woman who works with me who once she was in the room and I was talking about some of these issues and she started to tear up. And later I went back and I said, I noticed you teared up at one point. She said, I realized that I was guilty of what you were talking about. She said, my son is 2, my daughters are 3 and 4. That when my daughters seem kind of helpless and like they need a hug or something, I'll pick them up and hug them and console them. But if my son's sitting on the stairs whimpering, I just look at him and say, you need to man up. Don't act like a little sissy. And I think she had actually done that a few days before. She teared up. Okay? So we need to realize little boys need love too. Little boys need literacy too. And so all these gender gaps that we see in the world, some people say, oh, it happens all over the world, so it must be biological. Well, we got the same sociology of gender we also see all over the world. And I think I heard of one place where they don't have it that way. But any case, so we need to work on these differences. And I'm suggesting to you that even in the research literature, we find differences in parenting and nurturance that go along with the differences we're seeing here. Okay. There's no reason to look at differences like this and say, oh, that must be biological, it must be genetic. Okay. Life experience makes a huge difference. Genetics tend to account for about half of what we see, of the development that we see among human beings in the world. The rest of it is nurture. You got nature and nurture. There's a ton that we can do with the nurture piece, and we have some responsibility to do that. The thing about school readiness and how much school readiness matters, for children who enter kindergarten ready, about 82% are on track with their basic reading and math skills at 5th grade, which is around the age of 11. So if they hit kindergarten ready, they kind of stay on that high trajectory, they're doing well by 5th grade. If they're not kindergarten ready, only about 45% are on track by 5th grade. And so those gaps keep opening as they get older. Because learning is cumulative. You know, you're building on top of what you bring. And if each step along the way, some kids are bringing less, they got less to build on, less to connect to. Think about the kids who are slow on the language processing speed. They hit kindergarten. The teacher's explaining things. The teacher's kind of watching the class to see whether they're keeping up or not. Most of the kids are. But there are a few kids in the class who are still trying to figure out what she meant by what she said 20 seconds ago because their language processing speed is slower. And that happens over and over again. And finally, the kids just say, well, I think I'll give up. And by 3rd grade, they're making mistakes. They're not doing as well as others. And 3rd grade is the year the kids get much more conscious of their own rank in the achievement hierarchy. And it's better to look lazy than stupid. So they go out of their way now trying to convince everybody else that their poor performance is just because they're lazy and don't care. And often they really are trying, but they hide their effort. Even if they haven't totally given up, they don't want anybody to notice that they failed and attribute that failure to lack of intelligence. They want people to attribute the failure to lack of effort, which gives you the extra behavior problems. Kids actually putting work into convincing other people, I don't care and I'm not working hard. and also thereby disrupting the class, making teachers' job harder, leading to more teacher turnover with teachers who are leaving the schools because they just don't want to put up with the behavior management issues. So you have all kinds of ripple effects of the problems we're talking about. So what can we do? Saturate whole communities with the basics. Make life the program. Okay, families experience positive reinforcements from every direction for doing the basics. That's why I said not just a boutique program, but hit them from every angle, right? From the doctor's office and the church pulpit and the library and every place that people interact with folks that they already know and trust. So this is the introductory video that we use to introduce the basics. The basics started in Boston in around 2015 with a local civic group called the Black Philanthropy Fund. They helped to get it off the ground. The Kellogg Foundation helped us some, but the idea was to go citywide and reach as many people as possible. As we started doing this, I would talk about it, because I give a lot of talks around the country for K-12, for basically regular school systems, and I would throw in some mention of the basics at the end of it, and people would say, hey, that looks good, can our community be a part of that? And I would say, we're still figuring it out, and the answer would be, well, that's okay, we'll figure it out together. And so we have what we call the Basics Learning Network. There are about 30 cities around the country that have gotten a start, and about 10 more that are kind of trying to start off. So somewhere between 30 and 40 cities. There's also interest in China, Brazil, Chile, and a few places in Africa. And so it's starting to spread. And we're still figuring it out. We still haven't totally perfected it. There's still some extra pieces. But we've got quite a bit of it already figured out and scaffolded. And not just how you reach parents, but how you structure organizations to reach parents and how you structure the whole community. So we want to be able just to hand over the frame and just plug it in to various places. And people in most places are already doing something. They're already interested in these years. And so this just is a systematic way to just plug it in. We have been focused on 0 to 3, but everything we're talking about applies 0 to 5. So for communities that want to take it 0 to 5, it's not a big deal. It just plugs in. But this is a 3.5-minute video we usually use to introduce the campaign.
Now I know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me?
Learning begins the moment your child is born.
Baby, baby, baby.
Do you want to play too?
Every child is filled with vast potential for success in life. And those first 3 years can have the greatest impact on your child's learning.
Apple, look, where's the strawberries at? Yes, that's lemon too, and kiwi.
Wow, awesome job.
It's all about giving a child a proper start. That's what being a parent is all about.
Yay! We didn't like that song.
I wanted to make sure that I was here every day. Such a joy.
Every parent of every background can make a positive difference in their child's life.
It's peeling. Boom.
A few simple, everyday activities can make a big difference.
Those are flowers.
That's why The Basics is working with research and community leaders to promote an important new initiative.
That book is finished.
The Basics are 5 simple principles that we want everyone to know. The first of the basics is to maximize love and manage stress.
You got this.
The second is to talk, sing, and point.
Let's take a bath. A lovely bubbly bath.
The third is to count, group, and compare.
1, 2, 3.
The fourth is to encourage and enable movement in space and play.
I got it. Use.
And the fifth is to read, but not just to read. We want to read and discuss stories.
Whoa, what is that? A duck. What does the duck sound like? Wow.
These are the 5 fun and simple things that every parent can do beginning from birth.
High five. Oh, yes.
Let's all work together to make sure our children can become the best, most well-prepared they can possibly be.
Maximize love.
And manage stress.
Talk, sing,
And point.
Count, group,
Y compare. Explore through
movement, and play.
read,
And discuss stories. Please join us and help spread the word.
And then there's a 4.5-minute video for each of the separate basics that has a dozen or so ideas in it for how parents can do these things. These are the basics listed here. Let me say a little bit more about each one of them. The first of the basics, maximize love, manage stress. Infants and toddlers who feel secure, free from stress, feel deeply loved, tend to develop stronger executive function skills. Executive function skills are basically self-control skills. They're skills to decide you're going to do something and actually follow through on it. The skill to shift your attention from one thing to another thing. The skill to resist the impulse to do something you know you shouldn't do. So impulse control. All these are skills. It's instantiated in the brain to give you the wherewithal to do these things. And kids who feel really secure will be more confident, and they'll develop stronger executive function skills early on than those who don't. And so paying attention to particularly stress management for parents, knowing that they need to manage their own stress so that they will be there and available, psychologically and emotionally available for the child, but also to be aware of what causes the child's stress and try to shield the baby from stress. Not just babies, but babies and toddlers from stress. Some people we've encountered say they don't even know how to express love because they grew up in households where not a lot of love was expressed. So sometimes we need to model that and talk about how love is expressed. But then even more people don't really know how to manage their stress or even be aware that they're feeling stressed. And sometimes it's such a natural state of being. So starting to share ideas about mindfulness with parents and other personal stress management things. And even in the workplace, trying to pass along ideas about stress management and have activities that can help people to think more about stress management. This particular one of the basics is the one that is least standard in how we communicate with parents about early childhood parenting. The other ones are often in the mix, but this one is not. And so adding this as the foundation for the others tends to be important. I mentioned earlier that people are denying affection to toddler boys for fear of undermining them, of undermining their masculinity. I think I got a bottle of water on the table there. They're already open. Yeah, thanks. We don't want to, or people don't want to undermine the masculinity of their little boys. But they're also afraid of spoiling their infants. They're afraid that if they hold their infants too much, they will condition them to being held and won't be able to put the baby down without the baby being upset and crying. And this concern people have all over the world. But it's wrong-headed. Okay? There are two issues here that often get conflated. One is when it's time to put him to bed at night, is it okay to lay him down and let him cry a little bit before they go to sleep, rather than keep picking him up if they don't want to be laid down at night? There actually are differences of opinion about that. And here we're not taking a strong position on that issue. The bigger issue with spoiling babies is like you're sitting around in the afternoon. Nobody's planning to go to sleep, you or the baby. Is it okay to pick the baby up and hold him for a while? Some people think it's not. That most of the time you should leave the baby in the crib or on wherever they are so they get used to being independent. There's a whole literature on attachment theory that talks about the importance of early emotional attachment between children and their caretakers. And so it's important to follow that impulse. When we have the impulse to pick the child up, a lot of those impulses developed over millions of years, over hundreds of thousands of years at least, and they're productive. And so that's a productive impulse to pick that baby up and hold them. There's a woman, last night I talked about a woman who, she's a nurse in Houston, and she has a little act that she puts on, and she role plays the baby in utero. And she talks about how the baby's in the womb feeling all safe and comfortable, it's warm, you're never hungry, and there's always this little sound, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And sometimes there's this soothing voice that comes down, the mother's voice, and everything is good, right? And then one day, the walls start to close in. It gets, tighter and tighter. What's happening here? And the baby sees an opening, sees a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to go for it. They go out, and they come out, and they're born. And then now they're out, and it's cold. And there's a bright thing in their eyes. The light, they've never seen light before. It's hurting their eyes, and they're cold. And that ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom is not there anymore. And then in a minute or two, something wraps around them. And they're feeling a little more cozy again. And then they lay down, and they hear the ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom again when they're laid on their mother's chest. And now it feels more natural again. And she's saying the baby's been in there for 9 months, feeling safe and secure. And now you want to bring them out and just have them lay by themselves and feel okay about that. Okay? So she said it takes a while to get acclimated to being out in the world. Babies should be held. And we need to give people permission to do that. I had a young man who was a high school teacher at a school in Boston who was in the audience once, and he was from a household where people told him, don't hold the baby. And he was just so thrilled that he could go back home now and tell people that he'd been to Harvard, and the professor told him it was okay to hold the baby. Okay. And so it's an important thing, and we haven't really developed a whole set of materials yet around this issue of spoiling, but it's a part of the Maximize Love, Manage Stress that we do need to develop some materials around. And actually, I scheduled another poem in here. Find it in my pocket. I got a lot of papers in my pocket. Taking it out if I'd remembered. Yeah, this is a poem, because what we want to do is to pull the community together. And so this poem is called A Basics Community Contract. We should sign a basics contract wherein, when it comes to babies, we would share an obligation with no ifs or buts or maybes. Maximize love, manage stress. We could guarantee that parents would be rescued from their stress by supportive friends and neighbors helping put their cares to rest. This includes the types of friendship where, when weary from no sleep, every parent finds a trusted soul, their precious child, to keep. Talk, sing, and point. And now, I accidentally flipped this slide. I still have those other 4 to go through, so I'm not just trying to decide. Should I go back and finish those other 4 or keep reading this poem? I think I'm going to go finish the other 4, then I'll finish the poem. So it's early in the morning. All right, so second of the basics. Talk, sing, and point. Or talk, sing, and point. Babies can hear at least 3 months before they're born. So they come out of the womb already having started to encode language. They already are aware of certain sound patterns. They already recognize their mother's voice. An implication of that is that we should therefore talk real language to them as soon as they're born, because that's what they're already used to, not the gibberish that we sometimes think of as baby talk. They've already started to get the structure of language. At the same time, we want to use the high sing-songy voice that we call parentese, that voice that babies and puppies like, that it's just that, oh, look at your toes, they're so cute, that kind of voice, right? And so that's the voice babies tune into. If I just talk in this regular voice, babies don't tune into that. But little babies tune into parentese, and we want to use the real words. The pointing, there's great research on how when you point at what you're talking to, it helps the baby start to associate words with objects. And babies will point before they can talk. And the singing is almost like parentese. It's just another voice that you're in that babies will tend to tune into. So we want to, from the very beginning, talk, sing, and point to lay the foundations for language development. And if we think about sequentially what's most important, the first two basics, maximize love, manage stress, talk, sing, and point, they're relevant from day one. Time the baby is born, those are important. The others are to come in after that. Count, group, and compare is laying the foundation for numeracy. We want the child not to just be able to count, but to know that numbers correspond to groups of things. 5 is 5 of something. It's not just a number you say after 4. And taking between 4 and 10 objects, regrouping, playing grouping games, will help a child more quickly catch on to the idea that numbers correspond to sets of things. The comparison, we want kids to learn to be aware of patterns in the world, preparing them for geometry and for all kinds of things. Even driving a car requires spatial intelligence, being able to see a pattern and place ourselves into a pattern in a certain time frame. And so from the very beginning, count, group, and compare is building the parts of the brain that do these things. And this is the one that's most neglected. When we have like group activities, we have people say, well, which of the basics do you think is most important? Which one is the easiest to talk about? Which one's the hardest to talk about? We might have them put posted stickers on pieces of paper that have basics on different pieces. You get almost no stickers on count, group, and compare. People aren't thinking about it. And so we want to raise their attention to that at the same time we keep dealing with the others. Explore through movement, play. We want parents to know that playtime is not wasted time. Playtime is discovery time. Kids are looking at things, they're trying to figure things out. So if we pay attention to what our little kids pay attention to, we can amplify it. We can go in, we can be a learning partner, like that first role in the formula that I talk about. We can welcome the child's curiosity and let them know that if they're interested in something, they want to know something, that we are excited about that we welcome it, that we want that. And so we're nurturing that curiosity. And finally, read and discuss stories. It's not just about reading, it's also about interacting and processing and building the cognitive skills there. We read to our kids until they were in 5th grade, roughly, every night at bedtime. But we almost never discussed, right? And a lot of these things that are in the basics, middle class folks in particular, oh yeah, we did that with our kids. I would say, no, you didn't. I don't say that for talking one-on-one with somebody, but I can say it to an audience, right? And so, because the thing about maximize love, manage stress. Most of us are very affectionate with our children, but we weren't that conscious of shielding them from stress. Okay? Talk, sing, and point. We talked to them, but we weren't that conscious of pointing to help them associate words with objects. We counted their fingers and toes, but it was probably a while before we thought about playing grouping games. And even if we did it, we didn't do it that intentionally. We just did it when we kind of had the urge to play grouping games. And we probably weren't that aware of making lots of different comparisons for them. Explore through movement and play. We brought them all kinds of nice toys to play with, but we weren't that tuned in while they were playing with the toys, right? We weren't paying that much attention to really getting as engaged as we would have been if we had known how much difference it might make. And read and discuss stories. We read, but we didn't discuss. I mean, if I asked for a show of hands of how many of you had regular discussions with your kids when you read stories, it would not be a lot of people in the room that would raise their hands. So the basics are, we were inspired to do this because of the needs of some folks that are needier, but these are universal. This is relevant to all of us. It's a set of ideas around which you can gather the entire community, and not just to help those people. Okay, it's to help ourselves and our own families too with these materials. And actually, some of our most enthusiastic people are middle-class mothers who have read the 300-page book, but whose eyes glaze over. You got so much information coming at you. How do you boil it down and figure out what you can hold yourself accountable for? This 5 has boiled it down, right? But we also don't want to boil it down further than this. People are sometimes inclined to say, oh, you're talking about love, talk, count, play, and read. If you just remember that, love, talk, count, play, and read, you just threw out stress management, you threw out pointing to associate words with objects, you threw out grouping games and comparisons, you threw out being involved with your child's exploration, and you threw out the discussions. And those are probably even more important than the love, talk, count, play, and read, or at least in integrating those things in. So all these things are things that we want to do. Last word on this is that when you're talking about infants and toddlers, it's sort of misleading to say you want to read. Because it doesn't really matter if you read. If you're sitting with a 5-month-old in a book, child doesn't know what you're reading, right? Child doesn't even care what you're saying too much. So what it's about then is speaking with expression, so the sound and patterns in your voice are kind of entertaining and soothing. Pointing at the bright colors so they're stimulated by the colors. Allowing them to hold the book so that you get a nice, warm, fuzzy, good experience with a book. And the child's emotional associations with books just develop to be positive. Even with a toddler who can understand the words you're saying, you can still just look at, some parents say, well, I don't like to read because I don't read that well. That's fine. Look at the pictures and tell a story. The child does not know you're not reading, right? So it's really about the interaction with the book when we're talking about infants and toddlers more than the reading. And it's really about the discussing. What you're saying, that exchange we're having. Okay, so let me finish the poem. Okay. I had gotten down to the talk, singing point in the poem. We would help each other come to know the benefits of talking and the ways that pointing helps the child decipher all that squawking. Count, group, and compare. We would post on walls and billboards things that little kids could count, near some sculptures made for grouping to compare and climb and mount. Explore through movement and play. We would donate games and puzzles and some toys to use outside. We'd make sure that every toddler has a tricycle to ride. Read and discuss stories. And each child would be enthralled by all the wonders found through reading, for we'd offer to each family any books they might be needing. Hereby resolved, if we all embrace this vision, that means friends and neighbors too, parents then will find the bandwidth to do what they need to do. Yes, they'll need to do the basics, and by doing your small part, you will help more parents help their kids to learn and grow up smart. If we all resolve to do these things we've learned will be required, then each child our efforts benefit will be a life inspired. So we're just talking about bringing together, do this all together. Now, just some images here. We can think of a care circle as the people around the child who are using the basics. And so we've got the parents and guardians, we've got the daycare providers, we've got older children in the house, extended family members. If everybody kind of knows about counting and grouping, comparing, then lots of people can play those grouping games with the kids or with them, and can talk, sing, and point, and can read and discuss, and support exploration, and shield the child from stress and experience and express love. So everybody in the care circle can do that. But then we want the care circle embedded in the community. And so around these adults and older children and extended family members are all these community organizations that families already know and trust. And it takes time to develop it. We can't get all of them going at once, but over a period of time, we can engage all kinds of community organizations. So you'll see health centers and pediatricians and hospitals are at the top of the list because medical professionals interact with everybody. There are about 13 well baby visits from the age of birth to 3. Every one of those well baby visits can have some encouragement to do the basics. We have a little script that doctors can use. Okay, while they're there with the parent anyway, they're examining the baby. So what's the running conversation about? Okay, you start by asking, what's Jackie doing that they weren't doing before? Just by asking, what's Jackie doing that she wasn't doing before? The mother starts talking, tells a story. Almost no matter what she says, the doctor affirms it. Oh, that's good. You're being a good parent. She's developing. She's coming along. Keep it up. There are a few other things you might want to think about, too, that the baby's like, and start to weave in some of the other basics. So like 6 different steps in this thing that are very easy to go through. So by the time the parent leaves, they got some ideas about things they want to do more of before they come back for the next well baby visit. And that's just the doctor's office, okay? But then other places around the community. There's one recent study that found that obstetricians were very effective in talking to expecting mothers about things that were going to matter in parenting. And so, again, just all kinds of folks that can participate. Libraries are doing some fascinating things around the country. We're going to have a conference in early June. That's our second annual conference where we pull together the leaders of 30 or so cities around the country that are doing this. And we're going to have a whole session featuring libraries, because the libraries are coming up with really creative ways to reach parents. And it's not just useful to libraries. The same ideas that the librarians come up with can be used by staff at the daycare center or by the Sunday school teachers meeting with parents after Sunday school on a day with other people in the community who touch parents. And I could go all the way around that circle and talk about things that people that in each of these sectors can do. We're not much in barbershops yet. We still need to develop some videos. We've been told by the barbers that our videos don't look like barbershop videos. And so we need some videos that are young men talking to one another about parenting, or young men and old men. One way or another, some videos that seem like they are the kind of things that should be running on the screen in the barbershop. But in any case, we talk about socio-ecological saturation. We're talking about saturating the parent's ecology, all the same places a parent interacts with other folks. This is a 1-minute video, just one of the pediatricians. Boston Children's Hospital is one of the elite hospitals in the country for dealing with issues of early childhood.
I'm Kathleen Conroy. I'm a pediatrician at Boston Children's, and I'm one of our associate clinical directors of our hospital-based clinic. I'm also the medical director of our Young Parents programs. I think when I was introduced to the basics, it felt just this like incredibly refreshing reframe on how we help parents think about development for a bunch of reasons. One was that the messaging is so deeply positive. This line, the line from your videos about the fact that everyone has something that they can contribute to the development of their child is, I think, just incredibly inspiring and reassuring, right? It's reassuring as a practitioner and it's reassuring as a parent. It's really really changed for me how I talk about stress with parents and how I've sort of made a point of catching moments where parents are kind of giving me an opportunity, like giving me a window in on that, and it's allowed me to say, like, wow, do you think your child picks up on this, and what do you do about that, and how can I help you think through that in a way that's really it's really been a frame changer for me.
This next one, this is a young mother in Boston who was living in a homeless shelter at the time she was interviewed here, and she also gets home visits. And she'd been exposed to the basics through her home visitor. And before not in this clip, but later, she encouraged me, you need to come to the homeless shelter. She said, there's so many people sitting around feeling hopeless with nothing to do. Come in, talk to them about what they can do for their children, give them a sense of hope that life is not always going to be like this. But here she's talking about what difference it made with her own children. It's about a minute long also.
I found it very helpful because before I see the videos, I didn't realize how important it is put attention to the kids. I have one 4-year-old, and now I'm trying to read her more often, more than before, for her too, and trying to do a play with her, showing more stuff, and I see that she's trying to express herself more, like her speech life is like improving for everything. She kind of, well, she's not in school yet, but now that we trying to read or see a book, she always says she doesn't read at all, but she's trying to say whatever it is in the book. She saw a bird, she saw a boat, she said, oh mommy, look, the old man is getting jumping on the boat. She's trying to make it the story,
So you talk about read and discuss. Mothers have started to interact more. She started to use books more. And she's kind of excited that one of her daughters is starting to kind of wake up and get involved with these things. This is just an image of our last year's conference, the Basics Learning Network. I mentioned that folks have said, fine, we'll figure it out together. Well, we're figuring it out together, and there's creativity coming out now from a number of different places to help us to really develop a rich menu of things to do. There are 3 strategic emphases: sector-based, place-based, and informational. By sector-based, we're talking about the health sector, or the library sector, or the faith-based sector, where we're trying to tailor the materials to each sector. So we have a set of videos that are just for medical professionals to talk about how to integrate the basics into a medical setting. We have things we're developing maybe just for faith-based organizations that tailor to the way they operate and what their sense of mission is. And we want to have that over time. And then informational, just generally marketing, communications, ways for everybody in the community to hear about it. I mean, there's a rule in marketing, the rule of, I think, some people, the rule of 4 and there's a rule of 7. I don't know which is which. But the notion is if you hear things a certain number of times, you kind of warm up to it and you want to know more about it. So even having billboards and little pieces in community newspapers and things in social media where people get a little bit of exposure and then get more curious and get pulled in is kind of the idea there. And we're trying to develop materials to serve each of those 3 purposes. In the network, people like the fact that it's a science-based framework. Those 5 basics are all very firmly grounded in science. In fact, it was the National Committee of Experts that helped me boil the science down to the 5 basics. It's the same ideas that you'll often see in summaries, but most of the summaries of the science literature are jargony, and they're not in language that resonates well with parents. We've managed to hit the same issues, but in language that works well with parents. We've got an online toolkit that's got all kinds of tools in it. We talk about both retail and wholesale. So the retail are the tools that you work directly with parents with. Wholesale is more the material that the organizations who work with parents use to reach parents. And then the network learning community. These are examples of tools, the getting started with the basics thing, the skill building protocols for various kinds of activities, handouts, people watching the videos. By the way, all of our materials are replicated in Spanish. So we have all the videos reshot with Spanish-speaking families and a Spanish-speaking narrator and handouts in Spanish. So for groups that are working with families that speak mainly Spanish, there are parts of the toolkit that just have it in Spanish. We don't replicate the material for the staff in Spanish yet. And so we need to do more of that. But any material that are facing the families, all that is already in Spanish. And twice a week, text messaging. We've just finished, at least for the English for the moment, making it so people can sign up online. It's about $12 per recipient to get text messaging for 3 years, 156 weeks, twice a week. Monday is a factoid about a child your age, always linked to the basics, about your child's age, where when you sign up, the person signs up, they put in the baby's birthday. And so everything is calibrated to the week, to the age and weeks from there on for the first 3 years of life. And it's like a little curriculum that people get in text messaging. And the idea here is organizations can purchase maybe 100 slots. 100 slots, $1,200, you get 100 people can sign up for that. And people would receive a code from the organization. They go online, they sign up, they put in the code of the organization that signed up. So we can keep track of how many of the 100 slots are being used. And so that is probably going to be broadly rolled out within the next 3 or 4 months. And we're already piloting it. People are already using it now. We're also going to develop, we don't yet have online training and certification. So a frontline service provider can go on and watch some videos and read some things, answer some questions, and come away feeling comfortable about being able to share the basics and support families to use the basics. Right now, training tends to be more face-to-face or people watching the videos and listening to things on their own. And then outcomes for adults. We want awareness. People know about the basics. Their attitudes about doing some of these things change. they have knowledge and skill, their behavior, they actually start using the basics. And then we also want to just understand variation and what works for whom, when, and how. And then finally, longer-term impacts. We would like to be able to show after a while that once parents have become engaged with the basics, they stay involved, like doing the things in the formula that we talked about earlier. That once you've developed that sense of efficacy, hey, I can kind of affect how smart my child's going to be and how good my child's life is going to be. After they've kind of aged out of the basics, there's still things that they can do. So we want to be able to track and see if that plays out. So, but initially, we want to like double kindergarten readiness rates in 10 years. So rotate those lines up so that the kindergarten class of 2019, kindergarten class of 2029, that every year we get better and better. Kids are more and more ready for kindergarten. For little kids, we want to be able to track some of the early childhood developmental indicators and see how those are moving differently, and then finally kindergarten readiness is an outcome that we want. These are just signs of some of the places around the country. They're more have joined since that. I guess we're going to have a little dot right over here someplace before it's too long. Okay. And this is just the book. I told you what those roles were earlier. And then there's one poem to close with, and that still leaves us a little bit of time to have some audience interaction. Okay, the poem I want to close with is called The Caregiver's Promise. I think I'll just read it off the screen here. And this is from the perspective of a parent who's got a newborn. With my heart, I will love you and shield you from stress. With my mouth, I will speak what I feel. With soft words and sweet songs, every time I behold you, I'll show you that my love is real. With my fingers, I'll point at the objects I name, and I'll count them in groups to compare. With my feet, I will take you outdoors to explore while we play and enjoy the fresh air. With my eyes, I will read as I show you the world through bright pictures and stories in books. These are ways to make sure that your brain is prepared for successes wherever you look. This my promise I make from the day of your birth, that these basics I'll faithfully do. For my job is to help you grow happy and smart starting now, when your life is brand new. You will learn that your life is an artwork, and that you are the artist in charge. But before you decide what to do with your life, listen now to the beat of my heart. So I'm done, ready to open it up for questions, comments? Pardon? Oh, go ahead.
I'm curious to know what employers can do as part of that sector. You didn't hit all of them.
Okay. Actually, employers can push it out through their HR system. And we've actually are starting something called the Basics Business Network of employers who bring the basics into their business and share it with folks who have babies or grandbabies. You can imagine affinity groups being pulled together where people at lunch or after work can come together and compare notes and talk about how they're doing the basics. Employers can make sure people know where to go online to watch the videos, to get handouts, to share it in their families. And employers can also donate financially to help to sustain the local basics organization and local basics activities. And so one of probably our number one idea about long-term financial sustainability is to have Basics Business Network folks that help to support the local organizations. And then we'll have a parallel thing for the national, to support the national office. But in Boston, Partners Healthcare is the largest private employer in Massachusetts. And Partners is gearing up to push it out. Eastern Bank is another organization that's bringing the basics in there. There's a guy in South Carolina with a company called Contact that does clean room materials that they manufacture and sell. In China, it looks like pushing it out through large businesses will be the main way that we spread in China, because they don't have the kind of civic community that we have in the U.S. They don't have the civic organizations that do as many of those kinds of things as we do here. And so part of what we are working on over the next few months is really refining the model for the package for how business can bring it in and just have kind of a roadmap or a recipe for how to instantiate it into the business organization. Okay.
Okay, my question to you is, golly, this is loud. But how do we get people in our city to realize that parents that are suffering from depression, because we did talk about stress,
yeah.
but obviously depression and mental health issues are very different than stress. And that it doesn't mean that you can't be a parent. It doesn't mean that we're going to call CPS on you. But as a city, that we're reaching out to help you so that we can help the 0 to 5, so that we don't have the kindergartners go into school and they can't sit and they can't concentrate because they know they've got to go home and maybe mom can't get out of bed that day, or you know what I'm talking about, to that point. And I feel like at this point, as Amarillo, I feel like we've got a stigma on it. And I feel like that's something that as a community, as a school district, as all of us, that we need to work on it. And so I'm asking you, how can we get this to get better?
I think you could probably answer that better than I can. And the answer is you have to step up and be a leader. And you personally, who are already concerned about that issue, it sounds like you know a lot about it already. Step out and start educating other people and pulling it together. These things don't happen by accident, they happen on purpose. When a few people gather together, a few co-conspirators, and make yourself a nuisance even if you have to, some other people trying to get their attention. And so part of the answer is to do what you just did. You know, give it an opportunity to get the word out and start gathering people together. But also, everybody can also, for those parents who are feeling hopeless and just really stressed, I mean, part of that, just feeling supported by other people is one place to start. You know, when you're near folks not being indifferent, you know, expressing interest, genuine interest, and embracing them some. But I think it sounds like that's an issue that you already have your fingers into a bit. And so I would encourage everybody else in the room to support this work and encourage you to reach out and take some leadership. Okay, yes?
Dr. Ferguson, I serve on a committee here, and I think several in this room do, called No Limits, No Excuses. I think it's a very, very good committee. What we're trying to do is show that each of our students, no matter what you do, there's a future for you.
Yeah.
It may be a 4-year degree, maybe a 2-year degree. Do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's outstanding. I guess what I'm trying to get in my mind, I love what you said today. Should we change any of that focus of what we're doing? We're focusing on high school kids pretty well.
Yeah.
How do you say no limits, no excuses? I'm not saying we change the whole program.
Yeah.
How do we change some of our focus to center on what you gave us today?
Okay. I think you want to take a cradle to career perspective. I mean, there's no throwaway period in life. Okay, 0 to 3, it's a ton of brain development, a lot of interaction that I've talked about mainly today. 3 to 5, it's the socialization and basic pre-kindergarten skills. 5 to 9, it's learning to read so later you can read to learn and getting those other basic math skills. 9 to 14, it's starting to figure out who am I and how do I fit into the world and how do I resist all these negative peer pressures. 14 to 18, it's what courses do I need to take in high school to put me on the track that I think I kind of want to go on. How do I figure out how to be in a good place by the time I finish high school? 18 to 22, it's actually making that transition into high school. 22 to 30, it's getting your feet planted firmly in the adult world. In every one of those periods, there are roles for adults and community to support, right? And you skip one of them and don't do a good job in one of them, kind of pay for it later because it's not done well. One of the ideas that I like for business community that is to pick up around 5th grade, starting to give kids images of possible future selves. And it's not that you want everybody to decide they got to go get a master's degree in life. Okay, people posing to the child, what are you kind of interested in? What are you kind of good at or want to get good at? And there's a program in Boston called They Made It, So Can I, that brings people into 5th grade classrooms to tell their life stories beginning when they were in 5th grade, right? Everybody from the UPS truck driver to the brain surgeon. The kid who hates school in 5th grade sees somebody who comes and said, I hated school in 5th grade and I really never liked school, but I put a life together. Okay, here's what my life is like. I play softball on the weekend, I got 2 kids, I go to church, I do these things, and help kids at all these levels see that there could be a future for me. There's somebody like me that I can identify with. And you can take that just every year going up. By the time they're in middle schools, maybe twice a year there are field trips to businesses where they get to talk to people during the workday at work. You know, you go up and down the highway and you see these buildings by the highway, and kids never get to see what's in them. Well, take them in there. You go to the shopping center and there's those doors behind the meat counter. What's back there? You know, take them back. Let them see what the freezer looks like. The office buildings, what's in those buildings. Give kids a chance to go to meet people at work. And people actually like kids to come visit. They enjoy having that interaction. They feel like they're little mentors for a moment there, particularly if it's places where people actually work who are in that community, right? And also giving kids permission to be who they want to be. I mean, I like the phrase, all work is honorable, okay? Particularly in some families, you've got diversity among the kids. Some kids are more academically talented and skilled than others are. And they'll feel like I'm not living up to my big brothers or my sisters. And so nothing I can do really makes any difference because I can never match that. Okay, we need to help parents understand that every child has value, every child has a different mission in life. There's an image, a set of graphics I actually had in last night's presentation, didn't get to it. But let me try to explain it to you because I didn't have it here today. If you imagine X and Y axis, just a regular XY coordinate, and the 2 life directions. One axis represents one kind of life direction, the other axis represents another. And there are 3 arrows. One arrow is kind of long going off that's closer to the vertical axis. Another arrow is closer to the horizontal axis, but it's going up, it's kind of long. And then there's a little bitty arrow in the middle that's about halfway between the others, and it's shorter in both directions than either of the other arrows, right? And it's coming up right in the middle there. And that little arrow looks around, he says, everybody's better than I am at everything. There's no place in the world. People are better than I am even at stuff they're not good at, because he's shorter in both directions, right? But then out in the direction that little arrow is pointing, imagine there's a star out there on the horizon. Okay, talk about that person's North Star. And you could look and say, who's in the lead to get to that star? Well, the little arrow is, because neither of the other arrows are going there. Okay? And that diagram is helpful to help people know that every one of us has a different life direction. Every one of us has a different destination, a different thing that we may have been put on the earth to do. And if we don't do it, it won't get done, and the world won't be as good a place as it could otherwise have been. And your life's work is to figure out what your North Star is and do the work to get there. And at some point, you'll realize there's not any competition, and there never was, because nobody else was ever going there. It's yours uniquely, right? And so helping kids to wrap their minds around ideas like that. Also helping adolescents to understand that what they do during the adolescent years is setting up the rest of their lifetime. I like to draw a timeline, mark it off in 10-year segments, and then maybe when we get out to 80 or 90, put a little arrow at the end of it. And then the arrow at the time from 12 to 18, just put it in red, at the red zone, and show it to kids. Say, look at how short that is compared to that whole long lifetime. But if you take care of business in the red zone, you can be worried when you're out here at 30 or 40, 50 years old, worried about where to go on vacation and which kind of car to buy, as opposed to worried about how to pay the rent and what to tell your child that you can't afford those new tennis shoes he wants, right? And so those 2 things help with kids. But I would encourage you to think about ways to pay attention to each of those age ranges, help parents understand the importance of each of those age ranges. And the main point today has been, often we don't think of that 0 to 3. and that's important too. But that doesn't mean that we should pay any less attention to the others. All right, I'm getting the hook.
No, that's not that. You're not allowed to leave. I want you to stay for just a second.
All right.
I want to brag on you because we all learned watching you this morning what great resiliency skills you have. A man can jump ahead in his presentation, start reading a poem, realize, wait, I'm ahead, and just decide to make a joke about it and go back. And I really admired that. Not everyone would have that kind of resiliency.
The trick, when you're talking to an audience, you're only talking to one person. Because each person in the audience is experiencing you individually. So it's not some monster out there. It's just one person.
See? Look what all y'all are learning this morning.
Okay.
The other thing I want to tell you guys about Dr. Ferguson is about his generosity. I know you've already seen it on the screens, his passion for making a change societally across our nation, not just in one life, not just in one book, not just in one lecture, but I wanted to tell you the generosity that he's giving to our community. Last night, a group of volunteers came up to him after the lecture and said, we loved your content, we love your ideas, we want to incorporate them into some materials and framework that we want to use in our city. And just on the spot, he said, yes, use it, whatever you want to use. And so I know you can tell we're building toward asking you to help us implement this in our city. But I wanted to thank you for your generosity, to thank you for the work that you've spent your life doing so that you could come here on April 5th to Amarillo, Texas, and sow the seeds into our community that will change us going forward in ways we can't even imagine. So I know that might sound grandiose and big, but I really do want to thank you for your generosity and to thank you for what you've spent your life putting together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for being in Amarillo.
Thank you.
It went so well last night, and our school districts have been so supportive. Dr. Flushy and Mr. Loomis. We do have a question and answer session set up for Dr. Ferguson because we had so much interest in his expertise. It's open to everyone. The educators generated asking for it. We're going to do an extra question and answer after this, after we dismiss. So we'll get back to more questions with Dr. Ferguson. If you have some and you can stay, you're certainly invited to do that. Okay. The next part of our program as we finish up this morning is something that I've been anticipating for a long time, months actually. My friend, Mayor Betsy Price, is here with us this morning from Fort Worth. Betsy has served 4 terms as the mayor of Fort Worth. She's currently running, I just can't fathom how this happens, but she's running for her 5th term as mayor. So when you think about a community servant, yes, clap for that. That is amazing. When you think about someone willing to serve at that level, at that intensity, for that long, it's overwhelming. And I'm honored to call her my friend, and I would ask that all of you welcome her with a big Amarillo welcome as Betsy Price comes to the stage.
Thank you, Ginger. It's an honor to be with you all in Amarillo.
Good morning.
Good morning. I just hope you all know what a dynamo you have in Ginger Nelson as your mayor. I don't know whether she's a force to be reckoned with here in Amarillo, but she darn sure is at the state capitol, I can tell you that. Because we have been there way too much recently, Ginger.
We have, but that's how friendships build. They build through experience and common battles, and we've been doing a little battling on our own.
Yes, we have. And Amarillo is a near and dear spot to all of us. My sweet son-in-law is from Amarillo. His family's from Dalhart. And my college roommate, the first year I was at Tech, was from Amarillo. And Amarillo is a whole lot like Fort Worth. Fort Worth is much more West Texas than we are metropolitan. We're still that very hardworking, friendly, driven city, even though we've turned into a gigantic city.
Absolutely. Well, I want to start our conversation this morning, Mayor, by talking a little bit about how you and I got connected. I mean, obviously, we're mayors. We're, as far as female mayors, we're in the 2 largest Texas cities with female mayors, so that makes us a connecting point right there. But tell them just a little bit about the first time you and I had an opportunity to have a conversation.
I guess it was at Momentous.
Not really. I mean, it was a Mexican food restaurant.
Oh, and Ginger had a boot on her foot.
I did have a boot on.
Yes, we had hosted an institute for early learning from our whole part of the state and brought people in to see what was going on and what we were doing. And there were people there who were interested in implementing in Amarillo in West Texas. And Ginger called me and said, I'm going to be in Fort Worth. Would you meet me? And we had a great visit. We actually came in and I sat down and couldn't find her. And I thought, well, she's late. Well, she's sitting in the booth on the other side of the room. Couldn't find me either. So it was a good conversation we had about our cities, what we can do, and what mayors can actually do about early childhood education and education in general.
When I called her, I said, I hear great things about your leadership, and I'm new to my job. I need to learn. And so as soon as we sat down, I basically introduced myself, and then I got out my list of questions, and we dove right in. And she was very generous. I think we spent an hour and a half and covered maybe about half of the questions on my list. But
I learned an incredible amount from you. When you've been serving for 8 years and another term coming up, you tend to you hope you don't get mired down. But to start out with somebody new, it's amazing what you can learn from each other if you're willing to take the time.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you first became aware of the need to improve child well-being in Fort Worth.
You know, I've always been interested in education. I am a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 5, and I was a business owner. And so I knew full well how difficult it was as a parent to find quality childcare, to find the time to interact with your kids. Although my grandmother and my mother had all been teachers, and so we were all passionate. And you talk about discussing stories with children. That's one thing that my mother said. Read to these kids, but tell them what it's about. And they get older, ask them questions about what it's about. So we have done that. But I've always been passionate about education. When I became mayor, I knew more and more that we really had to change the trajectory of education. How many of you are a product of public education? Yeah, almost all of us are. It really is the backbone of America and Texas. And in Fort Worth, it certainly is a backbone. And we knew that we had to turn that around because public schools are struggling. The kids who are coming in so often aren't prepared to learn. We started an initiative called Read Fort Worth with our business community and our school districts to work on 5-year-old to 3rd grade. Because as you said earlier, children learn to read till 3rd grade and they must read to learn after 3rd grade. But real quickly, our goal is 100% of our kids reading at grade level by 2025. And you all may be in a little better shape than we are, but most of the major cities in Texas, only about 30% of your kids read at 3rd grade level. It's a startling statistic. But as we delved into that, quickly we realized that we would have a pipeline issue irregardless if we didn't start at 0. It starts at birth. It actually starts at prenatal. So we backed up and started working with our Early Learning Alliance, who was already engaged in it, and we started working with Workforce Solutions, with our hospitals, with all of our business community, because I knew we had to. And you get a lot of criticism. I'm sure you've heard that too. People will say, Mayor, I don't know why you're working on education. That's not your job. That's the school's jobs. That's the parents' jobs. No, it's all of our jobs. And one of the real places that hit home with me is Fort Worth was recruiting 2 very strong businesses that we would love to have had, high-tech businesses, and we got shortlisted with them with Austin. And they decided to go to Austin, and I called the CEOs and said, why Austin? They said, Mayor, your workforce now is good, but look at your pipeline. Your kids are not where they need to be. And that's a startling statistic. Because, folks, for us as mayors, and Ginger knows this, it's about economic development. For you as business leaders, school leaders, it's about making sure that there are good jobs that your kids can take. but the good jobs won't be there if you don't have the workforce for them. So education has to be at the forefront for every single mayor. I truly believe that. And, you know, it's just always been my passion, and I've just really seen it driven home more and more recently.
You know, I have heard people say that. They say, well, there's nothing in your budget in the city, in the general fund, that you spend to pay teachers or, you know, to support education. But just like I shared, going to visit those businesses, the main concern for them is workers, and it is a pipeline issue. You have to decide as a community how you're going to solve that pipeline issue. So I'm really curious, and I want all of my leaders and influencers that are here this morning to hear, what are some of the things that you've seen businesses in Fort Worth do? Like one or two things, examples of how business and economic leaders in Fort Worth have gotten involved in this issue.
Well, back real quick just to answer the questions why we're involved in this. Where are kids? They're only in school or in childcare a short amount of time in the day. The rest of the time, they're going to be on our streets. They're going to be in our community centers. And without a good education, without a firm footing, as my grandmother said, starting them up at birth, then they're going to be on our streets causing problems. So the city has to be involved in this. Our business community has really stepped up. Our Read Fort Worth program, which is 0 to 3rd grade now, is headed by my office, myself, the superintendent, but the leader on it really is Matt Rose. And many of you may or may not know Matt. He is chairman of Burlington Northern and is Berkshire Hathaway's executive vice president. And I called Matt Rose, as you can imagine, he's a very busy man, and said, Matt, we need to work on education. He said, no, Betsy, let me just write a check. Every time you ask me to do something, it takes all my time. So I said, meet me for breakfast, and he said, okay. And I started talking to him about childcare. And as a CEO, he never had seriously looked at what childcare, early childcare means to families, what their policies mean to them. They pushed that down to HR and just hadn't paid attention. And we started saying, your basic level workers spend 60% of their income on childcare. Hence, the turnover is great, and they're not in the workforce. They started a child care center, and he's reached out and worked with the chamber. The chamber is starting a new initiative to get better policies for families in place. Our business community has stepped up and funded part of an expansion for one community child care in desert areas where we have what we call a child care desert. They really have changed the dialogue in the business community. They talk about child care now, and they talk about their policy leaves. And when your own employer starts talking about it, just the sheer talk makes a big difference. But they've done a lot more than just talk. They've invested their dollars where their voice is also. I'm very pleased with the focus that they're showing.
So I'm pleased to hear that you asked. It's going to be okay for me to ask you guys for help. So
you got to ask.
Yes. What kind of results are y'all seeing in Fort Worth? You've been mayor for 8 years. You guys have been focusing and talking about this. You had this conversation moment years ago. Now, what are you seeing as far as some turnaround, some success stories? Can you share some of that with us?
Yeah, one of the success stories that we've seen is 2 years ago, after a year and a half of really talking about this, at my State of the City, and most of you probably go to Ginger's State of the City, I always ask the business community, I have one ask or one charge for them. And 2 years ago, the charge was get involved in early learning, get involved in literacy through 3rd grade, but particularly the early learning side. And we got our UNT Health Science Center, which is our medical school, public health school, pharmacy school. It's a big complex, and a philanthropic facility called Lena Pope Home, who used to do orphan children, now they do foster care children. It's very much a fixture in Fort Worth's philanthropic community. We got them to agree to partner, and they announced a partnership just for their employees that they would underwrite 50% of child care. They would build a new facility on their campus for child care for their workers. First people would be their lower level, lower income workers, and it would move up from there. They opened this year, and they can care for, and scalability always becomes the issue, but they can care for about 90 kids, and they have a wait list of another 85 or 90. 50% of their slots are subsidized by UNT Health Science Center and Lena Pope Home, and 50% are full pay. But the beauty for that, for business leaders this year, Michael Williams, who's our president of UNT, came to me recently and said, I've been astounded at just changing the fact that we have childcare on campus. They now are going to double their childcare facility after 1 year. He said, my turnover rate among my lower level employees has been cut in half. They stay because we care about their kids and because we're offering them subsidized childcare. That's a partnership that the businesses have really stepped up. The Rainwater Foundation, and you may be aware of the Rainwater Foundation, started 5 years ago, a Morningside project, and they began to work with children from the minute they're identified from our county hospital. This is in one of our lowest income areas, in the Morningside area. They start working with those parents on the basics of reading, talking to their kids, loving them, working with Cook Children's, which is our children's hospital, to intervene on early childhood adverse experiences. And they follow those parents. They have parent universities. They've stepped that up now and have taken on another school, and they will take on the kids feeding into that school. One of the things that they've discovered that the business community has been astounded at is that these children who are facing adverse, what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experience, trauma, abuse, neglect, if they're in a quality child care center, they're much more resilient when they hit elementary school and kindergarten. And the business community really finds that a big piece that they can buy into, where they can actually look at statistics that says this has made a difference. They really are beginning to step up. I've got 2 other businesses that are getting ready to build on-site child care facilities as a result of our challenge.
So businesses are stepping up with dollars, they're stepping up with conversations, and they're stepping up with their own awareness about their own employees' needs. Talk to us a little bit about how you've seen your school districts engage.
Yeah, the school districts are another whole issue. You know, Texas has full day, most cases, full day kindergarten, but not full day pre-K. They will do pre-K for disadvantaged children, learning disabled children, but it's half day. And what parent who's working can get a child to half day 4-year-old care, arrange to get them picked up, get them somewhere else for child care, and then get them in the afternoon? It just doesn't work, half day pre-K. So the school district 3 years ago said, Mayor, if you'll be the voice of our bond election, we will do a bond election that will fund full-day universal pre-K. So we now have full-day universal 4-year-old pre-K and after-school care in the same location for working parents. That's been one of the big pieces that the school district has stepped up. They partnered with Early Learning Alliance and Rise Fort Worth, our 2 really early childhood specialties, and said, will you help us develop the curriculum for 4-year-olds? And now they're going back this year. In about a year and a half, they will offer 3-year-old pre-K. And it will be through a partnership with the school districts and Head Start. And it will be in most of our Head Start centers and our ELA, the Early Learning Alliance centers. But the school district's going to sponsor that. They also came to the table and worked with us on workforce solutions. In Fort Worth and here too, I'm sure, the mayor of the 2 big cities and the county judge head up the Workforce Commission. And we received $60 million for child care in Fort Worth from HUD. But there are no quality requirements attached to that. So we changed that. The school district agreed to help us with that and administer some of those funds. And that's been a real win for quality child care.
Talking a little bit, you were mentioning some of your local Fort Worth groups that are already digging in and working on early childhood issues. We have that here in Amarillo, and I'm proud of that group. It's Operation First 5, and they tie in with lots of different other organizations and teachers and people that are working on this issue. Our Operation First 5 is working to elevate the awareness of our community in our community about the importance of this issue. But talk about your I don't know, let's call them collaborative cross-sector group.
Raising Fort Worth.
Raising Fort Worth. Go a little bit deeper and give us some specifics about
Yeah,
that.
Raising Fort Worth is a combined spinoff of the churches, the hospitals, the child care centers, the registered ones, and the Early Learning Alliance. All three, and their efforts have been recognized by the National Collaboration for Children as being one of the top 3 programs in the nation. They are really, we've just come out in partnership with my office and the school district, a new blueprint called Great Places for Kids, for Fort Worth to be the best place for families with children, because we have the second highest percentage of families with children in the nation. Fort Worth is a very young city. So they are upgrading local facilities. They've gone to our local philanthropic groups and put in grant requests and been granted in many cases. We're working with our Builders Association and our Developers Association to say, as you bring businesses in or businesses expand, get them to frame out a shell for childcare, a facility to go with that for childcare. Because we can find money through HUD, through the state, to operate the programs in many cases, but not capital dollars to build it out. And Raising Fort Worth's been very effective on working in that. Then they're working with the businesses and the chambers on developing family-friendly business practices, a toolkit that will say, these are the best practices nationwide for businesses to look at. How do they assist families? How do they assist with childcare? How do they grant family leave policies? And Raising Fort Worth has been very effective in working on that. And just this year, we are starting a new program that's a combination with Raising Fort Worth and the city and the school district on early ed hubs that'll be a summer program, so that our schools, particularly in our lower income areas, are being used for pre-K and 3-year-old, and the parents bring their kids to their neighborhood school. Most of this is being funded with local philanthropic dollars, HUD dollars, and a little bit of city CFA dollars, and one place community block grant. But we want parents to know these kids need to transition in, that they'll do better. Even the 3 months in the summer can make a big difference for a child that's not been in childcare, that's not been in quality learning environment, as they move into not waiting for that first day of school. And Raising Fort Worth has been a big piece in these early ed hubs that we're getting ready to kick off the 1st of June. They helped us draft the legislation that we have on the table now in Austin, HB 3738 and 3739, that very simple programs that encourage the state to develop a web-based universal access. One of the things that parents face that we've discovered, they don't know where there's good childcare. They don't realize the difference in quality childcare and just a child care center where a well-meaning grandmother or aunt is taking the kids and receiving HUD dollars through Workforce and largely placing them in front of a screen and not interacting with them. So to develop a statewide base, nationally, they're actually required in Fort Worth. And Texas hasn't taken the lead to do it. And the other one is to allow private businesses and to be Texas Rising Star. And Rising Star facilitated, rated facilities can get extra dollars, and parents can be guaranteed that their kids are going to be learning. And Raising Fort Worth has been very active in helping push that.
You know, Rising Star is a designation that the state gives to child care centers that meet these certain basic criteria for not just the physical needs of a child, but taking care and addressing some of the developmental needs of a child. And so it does hit home for us when I hear her talk about child care desert. It is a struggle for us to find Rising Star child care centers here in Amarillo. We have some. We need more. So that's a term I want to pause on for a minute, speak it out to you guys. I want you to wonder what it is, get curious about it, get curious about where they are in our city, who runs them, how do we get more of them. Those are conversations.
And you want them to realize that even if they're not receiving subsidies, they should be Texas Rising Star. And currently, Texas Workforce can't certify you unless you're offering subsidized child care seats. And that's not right, because these are good requirements. Their teachers, have to follow a certain curriculum, We want all these child care centers to be authorized for Texas Rising Stars.
Well, we appreciate your leadership for Fort Worth to lead the effort to put that legislation in place, and we hope it'll be successful.
Well, hopefully it's a no-brainer in Austin since they're focused on education right now.
Man, I appreciate those people serving in Austin.
No
That is
kidding.
a tall and steep hill, all the work they're trying to get done right now. Okay, back to our topic though. So we know that educators and people who serve in early childhood understand what their role is in this important issue. But I'm wondering how you've made it relevant, because what we have sitting with us this morning, Mayor, is a broad section of Amarillo leaders, business leaders, community leaders. And by the way, I just want to brag on y'all for a second. I am so pumped looking out into this audience. I wish I could have a one-on-one with every single one of you, and I'm going to get emotional talking about it, and tell you, thank you that you cleared this in your schedule. Thank you that you cared enough to give us this time this morning to come and hear about this. This is going to change our city, and I'm looking at our city changers. Y'all change it every day when you go to work. Sure, clap for that.
It's an impressive crowd. You've got a big crowd, bigger than I expected. So you are all to be commended for being interested in this topic.
I wish I could tell you one-on-one the impact every one of these people have in my city, but we're time constrained. Talk to us about how you engage the broader community. You talked about the business community, you talked about education and educators, and systemically how they got involved. How do you make this issue relevant to these people?
You have to have the data, and you have to be able to use your bully pulpit as mayor. The mayors have an incredibly strong voice in the community. I reached out to all our churches, to the business community, to the chambers, to all the PTAs, to the school district, to the community college, to our universities, and said, this is operation number one, is education. And then we broke it down into early ed and elementary 5 to 3rd grade, and said, who's going to take what piece? And we've just literally pretty much beat them over the head with it. We get the newspaper to write about early learning, Raising Fort Worth. You get the news stations to do the media. You just begin to really raise the profile of the criticality of it. And I think that so often people think parenting just comes naturally. That it's just a given that you're going to read to your kids. It's a given that everybody's going to. It just, in today's world, when more and more mothers and fathers are working out of the home, 65% of all of them are in the workforce. And when they spend 60% of their income on childcare, many, many of them drop out of the workforce. And the estimate that really startles many business people currently, and you've got to give them the data, the facts, and they will wake up and realize this is about economic development. This is about the overall health and well-being of our entire city. You just have to repeat it over and over. But currently, one of the universities gave us the statistics. 1 in 3 women with a professional degree and a master's degree drop out of the workforce due to lack of quality childcare and expense. That means we're losing incredible talent who should be contributing. And single reason they cite is lack of childcare. And if young professional women are citing that, think what that means to those mothers who are barely making ends meet further down the chain for them. I think for us, we have just made it a high priority in the community, and we talk about it all the time. People get tired of me talking about this issue, but they're really beginning to sit up and pay attention.
As you're saying that, it's reminding me, we have 2 teenage boys at home, and I'm often saying, don't chew with your mouth open. And I'm convinced...
Don't wear your ball cap to the dinner table.
Yes, I'm convinced that eventually they will get married, and they won't chew with their mouth open somewhere in between the time, that they need to find a wife and ask her to marry them. But what I hear you saying is intentional saturation, and that's what I'm doing with my boys on that message. I can't just say it once. I'm going to have to say it 1,000 times before I'm going to have to be intentionally saturating them with the message before they can sit at the table and not chew with their mouth open. And you're saying, be intentional. And I heard Dr. Ferguson saying that. community-wide. It should be at the grocery store checkout line. The basics should be there. At the barber shop, you know, everywhere we turn as a community. So whatever your circle of influence is, where can you be pushing out saturation for this message?
You mentioned the barber shops, and we had a national campaign for the beauty shops and barber shops, not national, but city and state recently, that got very little traction. But in Fort Worth, because we've been talking about it, 10 of our barbershops, big barbershops, picked it up. It was Read with a Barber for a day. And they went in and said, here are books for kids from 0 to 3rd or 4th grade, and here's how you really read with kids. Several hundred kids went through that program. And the barbers said, we're going to put up posters about reading and talking to your kids. It's those little things that really catch on.
It is exactly what you said, Dr. Ferguson, about what you can't, that you can't do by yourself, you can accomplish together. And it's,
you know,
saturation.
I love the quote that never underestimate the power of one individual to change the world, for indeed it's the only thing that ever has. And that's true in the case of early education. One voice multiplies to hundreds of voices, and multiplies to hundreds. And before you know it, everybody that's got a child has a pediatrician, a minister. We've had ministers who talked about this from their pulpit now too. Someone in their sphere of influence is saying, is your child really learning? Are you taking time to read to them? Are you making certain that their teachers read to them?
We have some of the most influential pastors in the room with us this morning, and so I'm really, really thankful for the work that you guys do. And I know you'll be using your pulpit to move this issue. You're already moving it in your neighborhoods. Okay, unfortunately, I knew this moment would come. We were almost out of time, so we're down to our last question. And I want to end our conversation on hope. Yeah. I want to ask you, what are you hopeful about? Where do you see the change happening? And it builds hope in you through this work that you're doing. And what do you see coming ahead?
You know, I'm really excited about this program. I really think it is a very hopeful program. There are some negative underlyings. It says we've let schools drop. We've let parenting skills drop. But those are all fixable if we take it back in. We have rejected the status quo of sinking test scores, the national gridlock, and nobody getting anything done, the political debate over child care funding, and we have just gone to a public-private partnership and said government can't do this and won't do it. And if they do, it'll be another 20 years. It's another generation of children lost. So we are rallying our community with that cry. The businesses, the CEO suites, the CFOs, all of them have to realize that this is a big issue for families and that this is future economic development. And my hopeful piece is they're really buying into that. They really can see that who these kids are that are born today is how they're developing is going to impact the quality of life in Fort Worth and indeed in all of Texas. And they will step up and do the right thing. I truly believe that.
I say all the time that we get to decide what kind of city we want to live in. And that's the exact message that you're hitting on there.
Government isn't here to do it for you. They're only here to be your aid, to facilitate. We as individuals have to take responsibility. As leaders, we have to take that responsibility and drive forward the key factors that can change the quality of our life in our cities.
Mayor Price, I appreciate your leadership in the state. You've been very generous in giving us your time this morning, but most of all, I appreciate your friendship.
I appreciate yours too, and thank you all for returning Ginger for her next election, right?
Well,
I know it's May 4th, same as mine. That's just my plug.
Thank you.
A quick aside on her, she told you about telling her son to chew with his mouth closed. I was a stickler, and I'll take 2 minutes, about manners with my boys and my daughter, but it was harder with the boys just because. And when my middle son graduated from A&M, he called me one day, was interviewing for this job, and he called and said, "Mother, I got the job." And he was really excited about it. And I said, "What was the deciding factor?" He said, "They took us to dinner, 2 of us, at a nice white cloth restaurant." And he said, "I knew exactly what to do." And the next day, my boss called me and said, "Paul, you're hired. If you can dine like that with your bosses, you can take our customers to dinner." It sinks in on them.
See, I need that word of encouragement. Stay the course, Mama, right?
That's exactly right.
Isn't it encouraging to know we can do something about this issue in our community? And you are here because you care about it, and now you're empowered, and we can invest and do something about it together. I'm guessing that as you sat here, you thought, oh, I really wish I had invited somebody to come. There's somebody on your mind or on your heart that you were wishing had this content. Well, good news. We did record it, and so you can get it off of the mayor's Facebook page. There will be a link for Dr. Ferguson's presentation and our summit here this morning. So encourage somebody to sit down with a cup of coffee and watch this content. They did not miss out, but now the power of getting it to them is in your hands. You need to invite them, you need to persuade them, you need to hold them accountable to make sure they actually sat down and got this content. We have the power to spread this across the entire city. We just need to choose to use the tool. There are books on your table this morning, and I want you to leave here with one in your hand, please. If you are a business owner, there's an employee at your business that you can use this as a connecting point to tell them you care about them and you were thinking about their kiddo. You can use this for a neighbor. You can use this for a grandchild. If you're a teacher, take 2, take 3. We want you to leave with something in your hand that reminds you you're going to look for an action step in our community. And these books are a fun way to do that. I have a couple of thank yous that I want to cover. When I visited with Mayor Price, came back, did a little thinking on this, I wasn't sure where to start in our community. And I turned to the Operation First 5 group. And Jill Goodrich and Victoria Hughes, girls, are y'all here? Where are you? Stand up. There they are, of course, working. There, here we go. Yes, please clap for them. I pitched the idea, and next thing I know, here we are. And isn't it amazing? And it doesn't just happen. It's been hours and hours and hours of their sacrifice and organization and willingness to give on this issue. So I'm so grateful for your leadership, ladies, and for the way that you've given to make this happen. Another big thank you needs to go to Kim May and her team from No Box Creative. All of the things on the table, everything that's happened this morning has been because of their skills in planning this event, and it has gone off without a hitch. So, Kim, thank you. Okay, the final word that I want to leave you with this morning is saturate. It's up to us to make sure that we are carrying this message. There is on the screen, you can see it right now. If you're inspired on how you're going to go out and saturate, we want you to tell us about it, because then we can use that to saturate in other places. So if you're ready to make a difference, let us hear from you. If you would text Amarillo Kids to 555-888, tell us how you think you're going to get engaged. If you have an idea, not one that you know how to implement, but you think it should be in the conversation, tell us about your idea. I did say we were on time constraints, and I wished I could have a one-on-one conversation with every single one of you. I can't, except that digitally I can. So please don't leave here, or when you get back to your place of work, take a moment and engage with us so that we can keep this conversation going. I'm so grateful for your time, for your vision, for our community. Oh wait, Kim's telling me one more thing. Oh, of course. Oh my goodness, we had amazing sponsors for this event, and without those sponsors, it would not have happened. Amarillo College, the work you're doing in our community, they're leading the way on child care centers for students. They are an amazing partner. The City of Amarillo, AISD, the Area Foundation, Texas Workforce Commission, the Coalition of Health, Region 16, Head Start, the the Amarillo Area Foundation, Amarillo Chamber of Commerce, and Kim, there's 2 more logos that I can't read. They're too tiny. Family Support Services, thank you. And who's the last one? I know you're sitting out there wishing I was recognizing your business, and I'm... The Amarillo EDC. Okay, thank y'all so much. The partnership, the sponsors, you're going to see the impact in our community, and it's going to move your initiatives forward as well. So you're all dismissed. We would ask that you take those things from the table that are interesting to you. Teachers, anyone else that wants to stay, just move your way on up here to these front tables, and we'll soon start the question and answers with Dr. Ferguson. Thank you all.